Welcome to Strictly Creative, where we speak with artists, innovators, visionaries, researchers, and champions of creativity. Today's conversation gets right to a subject that deserves far more attention: the mental health of fathers. Becoming a parent is often framed as a time of joy and excitement, but it can also bring stress, pressure, uncertainty, and major emotional change. While a lot of attention is rightly given to mothers during the perinatal period, the mental health of fathers and fathers-to-be is often overlooked. That matters, because a father's emotional well-being can shape how he copes, how he connects with his child, and how he supports his family. Today, we're joined by Dr. Ryan van Lieshout, professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioural Neurosciences at McMaster University, Canada Research Chair in Perinatal Mental Health, and a leading researcher in this area. We'll be talking about paternal perinatal depression, why it is not discussed enough, and a new pilot study exploring group cognitive behavioral therapy for fathers and fathers-to-be experiencing depression.
So, Professor, my first question for you is, what made you want to study paternal perinatal depression, and why does this matter?
We've known for a long time from research studies that depression is twice as likely to occur in the perinatal period for men than at any other times in their lives. So we know it's a period of unique risk, and we've always known that it's affected probably up to 10% of dads. But despite the fact that it affects this many people, as few as 1% of fathers with perinatal depression get treatment for it. And so that's from the research perspective. My job as a perinatal psychiatrist, largely for mothers and birthing parents, has led me to come into contact with a lot of their partners, a lot of fathers over the last 15 years. And what we've seen is that there really aren't any tailored treatments for dads struggling with depression in that time in life. Working with birthing parents and mothers, and then meeting some of the dads, they really want to have effective, engaging, efficient talking therapies, but they just aren't available. And so, what then happened is over time, meeting with dads, talking with them, and then I had a really fortunate interaction with some public health nurses in Ottawa, actually. And one in particular, named Dave, was keen to see if we could develop an intervention. And so, that's why we wanted to do that. We really wanted to make treatments accessible to dads. We wanted to develop them and test them, and if they're effective, then disseminate them and get the dads the help that they need.
Now, is perinatal depression, like we usually hear it predominantly, like I guess in the media, etc., that usually it's the mom or the woman who's dealing with postpartum depression, etc. When I first saw the ad on social media, and I jumped when I saw it, because I was really curious to find out more about it, because I know myself as a father, I've spoken to other fathers, and there's a lot of conversation nowadays, in regards to mental health, and people are open to have these conversations. And when it comes to, first-time dads, parenting, those responsibilities, those pressures, this, that, and the other, it kind of compounds. And nowadays we can openly talk about various mental health challenges and issues that people are confronted by in their daily lives. My question is, when does a person know they may be suffering from depression? Particularly, when would a father know in this period of their lives that they're probably suffering from some undiagnosed form of depression or what have you?
Yes. So, paternal perinatal depression refers to depression where the onset is either during a partner's pregnancy or in up to 12 to 18 months after the baby's born. And so you're absolutely right that about 1 in 5 mothers will develop these problems. So it's more common. But your other comments about that dads are more open to having these conversations and seek help than ever before is spot on. Not just, your experience, but also, the experience that we've had with partners of moms and other dads that we come into contact with. And so it's a real credit to this generation that they're having these conversations and seeking treatment, because these dads really want to be, the best parents they can be. So, so how do we know if someone's is having problems? Well, we can look for typical markers of depression, like kind of low mood, a good part of the day, taking less pleasure or enjoyment in things that they used to like, lower energy, and problems with appetite and sleep. But beyond those classic markers of depression, sometimes paternal perinatal depression manifests as increased levels of irritability throughout the day, more anger and anxiety and worry, feelings of powerlessness, and even a lack of interest in their offspring, even when, they want to be interested. Some dads will withdraw socially more when they're feeling depressed, and others can start to neglect their appearance, the way that they take care of themselves, and sometimes dads will even start to use more recreational substances to try to cope with those symptoms.
Wow. From interacting with fathers and families and so on, do you think it's talked? Do people talk enough about this issue? Is it out in the open?
Well, I think even though we've both alluded to the fact that people are talking about it, more than they used to, it's still something that's shrouded in a lot of stigma, and a lot of dads can feel shame that they don't, they shouldn't, but they shouldn't feel ashamed. There's nothing to be ashamed of, but they'll feel shame. This is mixed up in sort of things like traditional, masculine ideals, and dad's just general reticence to talk about these things in certain circles. So other things that contribute to why it's not talked about enough is that a lot of dads are not aware of it, and so I'm really glad that you're doing what you can to raise awareness about this problem. And it's not just the dads that aren't aware of it. Often family members aren't aware, partners, and there's a widespread lack of awareness around it by healthcare professionals as well. Family doctors are seeing people with so many different kinds of issues, asthma, things like that. But we're hoping that more of them will recognize that this is a time of particular risk for fathers. Another thing that I think contributes to the lack of discussion and the lack of detection by dads and family members and healthcare professionals is, if we find it, there's a real lack of sort of evidence-based treatments designed specifically to treat depression at this time in life, and that's sort of why we've started to do the pilot study that we're doing.
Very interesting. Now, in terms of like what gaps in support or research made you want to launch this study? I know you mentioned that you were engaging with some of the nurses here in the Ottawa region, and they mentioned I think they wanted to have this sort of thing. But like beyond that, what are some of the gaps in support or research that made you want to launch this study?
Yeah, one of the things that I was, before doing the research study, I knew I had a sense just from my own clinical work that there were gaps. When I met with Dave, the public health nurse from Ottawa, he reminded me that they'd had programming, supportive programming for dads there for more than a decade. But these can be hard things to sustain. But when
May
I
I
was
ask why?
when
Sorry to interrupt. May I
Yeah, I
ask
mean,
you
I think
what?
sometimes for the you had asked some good questions before about why don't people engage, right? It's sort of there's some stigma and shame, and sometimes dads don't want to talk about it, and so it can sometimes be hard to have enough people join the groups and things like that. And then of course these are very busy times in people's lives.
Mhm.
A lot of dads are still working outside of the home, starting a family, making those adjustments and transitions and in their roles. And so there can be a lot of reasons why that happens. And we spoke to a lot of dads when we were developing our intervention and the study to try to deliver it in ways that overcame some of those things.
Okay. In terms of the study itself, can you tell us in a simple way what participants would actually do?
Of course. So, one of the things that we were shocked by when we looked at the research and when we were thinking about developing this study is that there have only been two trials, two big studies of interventions for dads with perinatal depression. One was an app that was developed by Australian researchers and was published in 2025, and they found that uptake and compliance with the app was very low, and it didn't help with symptoms. A second study that was done in Pakistan over the last couple of years and published just last year used an intensive sort of one-on-one individual sort of play and talk therapy intervention. And while it was effective, it hasn't been tested here. And so when we developed our study, what we wanted to do was develop a group intervention so that we could find efficiencies with time and cost, but also to use the group to leverage the really wonderful things that happen in therapy that involves multiple people. Things like the normalization of symptoms, support, role modeling that the dads do for each other, and so on. And so, our study involves it's a 9-week group cognitive behavioral therapy intervention. It happens on Thursday nights from 6 to 8 because dads had told us that that's when they were most likely to be available, like in the evenings. So in the study, people complete a series of questionnaires about their moods, about their other emotions, the stresses in their lives, and then if they have a baby, they tell us answer some questions about the baby, and their current sort of social situation, and then they complete those questionnaires before the group starts, right after the group starts, and then 6 months after the start of the study. So 3 sets of questionnaires they complete. The questionnaires take about 20 minutes to do each time, and we give them a gift card each time in compensation for their time. So that's the study. It's a randomized control trial. So half of people who meet the eligibility criteria get randomized to the treatment group, and the other group just gets treatment as usual from their doctors and other supports. So we don't restrict people from getting other treatments, but only half of the people get the intervention that we've developed.
Why did you choose group CBT for this, and what do you hope fathers get out of it? And I think you've kind of answered that a bit, but tell us about that. And for those who may not be familiar with CBT, if you could give us kind of an overview.
Yeah, perfect. So we chose cognitive behavioral therapy is a type of talking therapy that's been around in one form or another for about 70 years. And it's based on, the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy for depression, is based on the observation that people who are feeling depressed have more negative thoughts about themselves. I'm a bad dad. Others, no one cares about me, and the future, like I'll never figure this out. And what happens when we have these kinds of negative thoughts or cognitions, as they call them, they lead to strong emotions, right? You can imagine if you're saying like, I'm a bad dad and I'll never be able to figure this out, it can lead to feelings like, depression or sadness, anxiety, worry, irritability, anger, and things like that. So when our brain detects those kinds of emotions, it often tries to make them go away right away. And the most effective short-term way to make emotions go away is to withdraw or avoid things. And while those sorts of actions or behaviors, withdrawal and avoidance, can be helpful in the short term, in the long term, they make those thoughts or cognitions about ourselves, others, in the future even worse. Things like, if we withdraw, shut the shades, close the curtains, and keep other people away, then we have even more negative cognitions or thoughts like, no one cares about me, no one wants to see me. And so this cycle of cognitions, moods, and behaviors goes round and round. And what CBT aims to do is to break the cycle in 2 places. First, it aims to try to teach people how to identify those thoughts or cognitions about themselves, others, in the future that are leading to those negative emotions. And then we intervene at the point of the behaviors by having the dads engage in more sort of mastery activities, things that give them a sense of accomplishment, and more pleasure activities, things that make them feel better. So we chose a CBT based framework for our intervention, which we call Finding Strength in Fatherhood, because it's one of the best established treatments for depression, including perinatal depression in moms. Because dads with depression are open to using a range of different strategies that are like skills based, which CBT really is, and we also chose it because CBT is really amenable to something we call task sharing. That is, I'm a psychiatrist, so I'm a physician who's done specialty training in psychiatry, but CBT can be delivered by people who cost a lot less than me, nurses, social workers, registered psychotherapists, and others. And so we picked a CBT framework because if we show that the dads like the group and that it's effective, then it can be spread and scaled more broadly because it doesn't rely on sort of real expert, like, psychiatrist expert level or psychologist expert level delivery. So, we also know that dads in the perinatal period have a lot of unhelpful cognitions and beliefs, and because CBT, can be tailored to focus on experiences that are unique to each dad, we thought that it was ideal. And then because we have these more active, practical behavioral strategies in CBT, the B in CBT, things like getting them doing more of these mastery and pleasure activities and seeking supports and working on their communication and things like that, we thought that this was a great fit for this group.
I see. In terms of depression amongst these dads, are these first-time dads, or are they dads that have like more than one child on average?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough nice things about the dads in the groups that we've run in the pilot study so far. They come from a lot of different backgrounds. Some of them are not yet, their partners haven't had the baby yet. For some, it's their first time dads, and others already have 2 or 3 children. So it's a real mix of individuals. They're really, really varied, but they all have in common that they're, really decent guys who are interested in becoming the best parents they can be, and sort of just and getting better. So yeah, it's a really wide range of people.
In the study, or in the questionnaire, I guess, do you ask questions in regards to their their own relationship with their parents? Were they raised by a single parent? Do you look into that sort of?
We do ask them questions about their backgrounds and their lives, and we do talk a lot about those kinds of things in the sessions. One of the sessions focuses on the transition to fatherhood and what that's been like, and in another, we do an exercise where they're forging a new identity as a father, and we talk a fair bit about the parenting they received, and if they want to talk about it. Not everyone has to. Some people choose to and some don't, but we do touch on those issues because they can be important to forging one's own identity as a dad.
What's some of the feedback you've gotten from the participants?
So because it's a study, I'm not able to look at the data and the interviews that have been conducted so far, but in terms of what people are saying in session, they seem pleased that they have a forum in which they can talk about things that are important to them, that they can get support from other dads, and that they can learn more, even more strategies than they might already have to just make their lives feel better and improve their moods and reduce anxiety. So it's been quite positive, and they're it's great fun to run the sessions. They're funny, they can be serious, but they're all interesting, and they're all really, really committed to their babies, their partners, their families, and the other people around them. They're amazing group of gentlemen.
Really interesting. I'm probably going to try to see if I can do a follow-up interview with some of the participants, at least here in Ottawa, if that's even feasible, or if there's an interest. I'd be curious to to look into that. But are you a dad yourself, if I can ask?
Yes, yeah. We have a 9-year-old daughter, and she's 9 now. She's adopted. She's absolutely delightful, and we're very lucky to have her. Yeah.
As a parent, how has, you're professional in this field. Obviously, you're the Canada Research Chair in perinatal mental health. How has, when you put on your academic hat on and you think about parenting, and when you take it off and you're in the parenting mode, how, I guess what I'm asking is, on a personal level, how has your experience, doing this research, how has it changed your perspective of parenting, or has it? Did you think about that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think there have been bi-directional benefits. Becoming a parent myself has helped me to understand on a deeper level the kinds of issues that people go through, the stresses they face, and the things that are helpful and unhelpful in helping them on their journey. I think these dads are so great because they're so open and willing to talk about things that they're going through, because they really are focused on the objective of being the best parent that they can be. And so, I think sometimes after we run the group, I'll go upstairs and talk about just sort of generally speak about how great it was and how inspiring the dads are. I'm a little further along my parenting journey, but just how excited they are to do the best that they can. And, it sort of makes me think, I think about how hard they're working in the face of the stresses they're facing. And it inspires me to try to do the best or an even better job as a dad when I finish the sessions.
Right on. What are you hoping to learn from this pilot study before doing something bigger, like in terms of the expected outcome down the road? I know this is a pilot study, but what is the overall objective, big picture?
So what we want to do, if we can, is run what we would call a full scale randomized control trial. So a full scale, like a larger study. So one of the reasons that we do pilot studies is if there are aspects of the research or the intervention that we're not sure about. So because there are no perinatal specific depression interventions for fathers, one of the main objectives of the study is to run the group with the dads and get their feedback on the content and delivery and format, to see if there's anything that we need to change or that we should change before thinking about a bigger study. The second reason that we did it is that um, there isn't a lot of research on how to recruit dads into studies of perinatal depression, and how to keep them in studies, how to keep them, completing the questionnaires so we can collect the data that we need to make conclusions. So we wanted to do this study to take a look at our processes, recruitment and retention and things like that, and try to fine tune that before we went on to a bigger study that would cost more money. Um, and the third thing we wanted to see is if there is a clinical effect, like, is it helping them? Is it not? And then using that to help determine how big a study we would need to do at the full scale study level. So some technical things that relate to that. The most important of which is, what do the dads think about the intervention and delivery of it, so that we can refine it if need be to proceed to a bigger study. So pilot studies, we do them to try to, we can make a small investment in a pilot study to do it, so that, if we get to a full scale study, it has a higher chance, a higher likelihood of succeeding. And since the grant money for these studies, by and large in Canada, is from the federal government and the taxpayers, we owe it to them to be careful stewards of their money and to do this sort of careful preparatory work before we proceed to full scale studies.
It's interesting because in terms of like promotion and targeting, I believe, like, you guys, obviously your team ran an ad on Instagram, and it was effective because I saw it, but I saw it more than once over different periods of time. I think I saw two different campaigns. I think I saw one uh, maybe last year, and that's when
Hmm.
I got, and then I saw it again.
Hmm.
And I think, leveraging, advertise or digital campaigns is certainly a way, especially for that younger demo. If you're looking at 20 to 30 to
Yeah.
40, etc. I think it's
Well,
certainly an interesting one. And also, it's interesting, these sorts of how you go about trying to recruit and get engagement from a just generally, as you described it, somewhat of a, it's a private matter, right? It's a
Hmm.
personal, and it's a big thing because it's parenting, it's fatherhood. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there on the digital side. But I have a bias for that because
Right, of
that's,
course. Well,
that's where I am.
I'm thrilled to hear that you saw our ads, and that's fantastic. We've had a lot of experience, doing this sort of recruitment with mothers and birthing parents. We just weren't sure how it would transfer to dads. And we're also really lucky to have really great partners at Ottawa Public Health who have been so instrumental to getting people, into the groups. We think that about half of the people that are getting into the study are actually from the Ottawa area, highlighting, just that it's great that we have these great partners at Ottawa Public Health to complement some of the stuff we're doing digitally. But thanks for noticing. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, I may want to do a follow-up interview with participants if there's a possibility for that. But otherwise, Professor, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed this, and I think, as I mentioned, this is something that I may be coming back around to in another way, down the road. And if there's any way I can assist in, you know, uh, promoting, etc., I'll definitely do my part. So thank you very much for your time. Is there anything else you wanted to share?
No, I just wanted to thank you, and it's been a real pleasure. And this is an important cause. These young dads out there are amazing guys. We didn't know how the uptake was going to be, but they've been fantastic, and the response has been robust, and it's been a real honor to get to know and work with these inspiring fellows.
You guys are doing incredibly important work. So thank you very much for all your efforts, to you and your team. And have a wonderful day. Thank you.
You too. Thanks.
That was Dr. Ryan van Lieshout speaking with us about paternal perinatal depression. This is a topic that touches family life, caregiving, emotional resilience, and the transition into parenthood in a very real way. And as this conversation makes clear, seeking support is not weakness. It is part of building a healthier foundation for fathers, children, and families. To find out more, please see the links in the episode description. You've been listening to Strictly Creative, hosted by Garmamie. Find Strictly Creative wherever you get your podcasts.